it is interesting to observe how these old mythical archetypes manifest themselves in such an open form in modern times. You know, the elites of, the archetype of the elites being cannibals and pedophiles and interesting people in general, right? So reading conspiracy people right now is almost like reading fairy tales of 500 years ago. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video I wish to talk about a couple of archetypes, like almost a mythical type of fairy tale stories that weirdly enough manifest today pretty explicitly in various subcultures, let's say, such as, you know, conspiracy theories and things like that, but also in a very popular culture itself, okay? Now, to start off, I wish to ask you a question. Who is the most famous vampire? And it's more of a rhetorical question because the answer to it is obvious. It's, of course, Count Dracula, right? And partly, by the way, this video was inspired by me reading a few years ago some sort of like criticism of Count Dracula from the point of view of like almost like Marxist class-oriented criticism, something like that. But it was pretty interesting, actually. But as usual, I didn't remember the author nor where did I read it, so I can't give you the link. But actually, this type of criticism is fairly prominent, so even in this video, you will hear plenty of ideas of this sort, okay? So you don't really have to go anywhere and read anything else about it. It's fairly obvious in itself. So in this essay, whatever it was, and I think very fairly, Dracula is being actually compared to like a ruling class in general, all right? Like, you know, he's an aristocrat. He's like a, you know, a member of the elite, basically, right? You might say like a very, very prominent capitalists, like very rich people can also serve as Draculas of today, right? So what's the idea behind the myth about the Dracula? It's that, well, he's a vampire, right? So he's something like supernatural almost, and he does something supernatural, right? And he is like a scourge, you know, like a parasite on the society. And this is pretty much the Marxist view of the elites in the first place, which is today very popular, right? Everywhere, from the left to far left to the far right, pretty much, right? So Dracula was literally drinking blood of people, so it was more or less a cannibalism, right? To stay young, so he actually became more stronger by virtue of making everyone else weaker, well, at least the victims, his victims. And he also obtained some supernatural powers through that, like he could climb walls, he could like turn into like a puff of smoke or into some animal, he controlled weather and things like that, right? Yeah. And this is kind of the myth that is still perpetuating in the society. So it's pretty interesting. It's like today we're witnessing, and I'm not sure if it's like only the matter of today. I think this sort of myth was always pretty popular to, you know, to this degree or another, to some degree at the very least. So this old myth of aristocracy or very rich bourgeoisie, I mean, a little bit later on in history, sort of like drinking blood, or without air quotes, actually drinking blood, right? Or like bathing in blood, like queens bathing in blood of virgins or something to preserve their youth, etc., etc. So it kind of, this myth kind of has two components. It's the component of the elites being something sinister and evil and occult and supernatural, right? Like demonic, basically, and the component of the elixir of life, right? That, well, in particular, blood as the elixir of life, in this particular case, in the case of vampirism or cannibalism, but in general just the elixir of life, like some supernatural substance available only to those elites, those sinister demonic guys, right? So this is what this video is about. It's firstly examining this myth, at least briefly, and then, like, again, reiterating, emphasizing that it hasn't vanished. In fact, maybe today it's more popular than previously, even though, like, it's kind of weird, right? Kind of a weird situation. But again, I maintain that it has been like that pretty much always, I think. Intuitively, it looks so that it has been always somewhere there in the culture, and it has never vanished, and it's still fairly prominent just as it was previously. So in my Facebook feed, again, I constantly encounter people, like, again, I've already told you that my Facebook feed is pretty interesting, to say the least. So people talking about the evil elites, you know, prolonging their lives by injections from newborns, or like, you know, or whatever, like torturing children for adrenochrome, whatever the hell this is, right? Or like stem cells, I don't know. Well, stem cell research is like fairly popular. It's like mainstream sort of scientific research, right? But then again, as I've already said once, it's actually not my idea, but I like it, and I completely agree with it, that the actual goal of medicine, by the way, watch my video Stories of Medicine, I'm gonna link it in the description, but it's not what I talk about in that video, it's something extra. In that video I'll talk about other things, like what is medicine, how it is structured, etc., and why you shouldn't rely on medicine to heal yourself, basically, long story short. But what is the ultimate goal of medicine? In societal sense, it's to actually heal the elites, right? It's not made for you. Like, that the medicine is available for you is just a secondary consequence of medicine being good for treating the elites, right? So what I'm saying with regards to that, with regards to our current discussion, is that unless there would be like a mass testing of some sort of adrenochrome or stem cell treatment on you, basically, you and me, like the regular folks, it wouldn't be actually used for the elites, right? Because, like, who knows what it's gonna bring. Like, we are expendable, but the elites are not, so, you know, they would think twice before doing something like that to themselves, okay? Like, for example, now we know that the messenger RNA genetic modification is thoroughly tested, like on billions of people around the world, and you know what I mean. So now it can be used on, you know, more important people in a more reliable manner, right? When all the side effects have been thoroughly studied, etc., etc. I mean, not thoroughly enough, probably. It would require a couple of years to sum it all up, but, you know what I mean. You know where this is going. So, except you might also argue, I mean, a counter argument to me, that there may be secret tests, right? Like maybe people sign some sort of non-disclosure agreements, etc. Like, we know that all the time, pretty much, various people were proposed to participate in tests of like experimental drugs, or even like chemical and bioweapons sometimes, you know. I mean, you get paid for that a lot of money, so if you were like dirt poor, why not participate in this, right? Like, I remember one instance of that was Frank Zappa's autobiography, the real Frank Zappa book, where he talked about how in his childhood, like his father, I mean in Zappa's childhood, his father participated in such tests. I mean, it was like 1950s, I think, and was like basically the Cold War time, so it was like some sort of weaponry, I think, that they were developing, the Americans, I mean. Okay, so this is the myth, right? That there's an evil elites using the elixir of youth, that they practice some weird occult, illegal and immoral stuff, all right, to achieve immortality or to get closer to it at the very least, right? I was curious at some point, Like, can it work on both sides? Like, this myth is clearly mostly propagated by the non-elites, right? Well, because, well, okay, I wouldn't get any motivational part for now, but yeah, it's like, well, the elites, they are sinister and evil and demonic, like, they're probably practicing cannibalism and pedophilia and something else, right? So, yeah, that's what, like, the lower classes might say. But I was kind of curious, what if the elites themselves sort of mythologize themselves, actually, in the very same manner? What if they're, like, deliberately sort of choosing and I'm pretty sure that they do, right? So they're deliberately choosing some sort of idols, icons from the past, like some sort of legendary heroes or even mythical heroes or gods even, and they try to sort of model their own behavior, like copying these other guys, right? I think this is fairly possible. Like, one obvious example I thought about immediately here would be Benito Mussolini, the founder of fascism. I mean, probably he wasn't the founder of fascism, but I mean, at least he was the founder of the proper Italian fascist state, right? So what he was doing is actually reviving the Roman Empire, basically with all the Roman symbolism, with the eagles and stuff, and the fascio is actually the symbol of, ultimately like a republicanism, right? Like a Roman Republic, the Senate and stuff, SPQ, actually, SPQR, basically, Senatus Populusque Romanus, etc. So maybe this process actually goes on in the elites. That's what I'm saying. They are actually like demonizing themselves in some sort of way, right? Or, I mean, heroizing, I don't know, whatever. They're building this narrative that we are, the strong ones, so we should do something that other people are not allowed to do, and we should build something super spectacular and like glorious and like competing with God or something like that, Okay. And again, this myth is still very popular, like returning to the more general, how would you say, trail of this discussion. This archetype, this myth, is still very popular in popular culture. Forgive me for this tautology. Like, again, and like, there's so many examples, I can't even like name you even a small part of them, right? But basically, whenever we're talking about something, again, very powerful, connected to the elites, it would be more or less something like forbidden or sinister or occult, or all of those things combined. And if we're talking about like some sort of old aristocracy with some weird stuff, we're basically going to end up in some Europe, like Central Europe, like places like Germany or Austro-Hungary, like places like Romania specifically, speaking of Dracula again, like think about Ghostbusters 2, who was the main villain. It was Vigo the Carpathian, right? So the Romanian Vigo, the scourge of Carpathia, the sorrow of Moldavia, or Alcina Dimitrescu from the Resident Evil, right? Which is again a clearly Romanian last name, Dimitrescu, in case you don't recognize it. I mean, it's like shockingly Romanian, let's say, right? And other things like that. So it's this, again, archetype of this old European aristocracy as something sinister and vampire or zombie-like, giving you all these Freemason, Rosicrucianist, whatever, Illuminati, reptiloid, eyes wide shut vibes, right? Like something with many centuries old history, forbidden ancient textbooks, Necronomicons and stuff, old magic, philosopher's stones, elixirs of youth, that kind of stuff, right? And again, we observe it all today in popular culture and in conspiracy theories as well. Dracula in the first place, like, firstly, it wasn't the first, like, popular culture piece that was, like, glorifying vampires, right? We've had some other pieces to a degree that the Dracula itself, you might say, was sort of plagiarized partly, all right? But anyway, so Dracula himself is Romanian, right? He's Vlad III Tepes, the Vlad the Impaler. Oh, and we also had this British propagandist myth about Rasputin in Russia, right? Who was practicing the occult rituals with the royal family of Russia. But it was also obviously a piece of propaganda against the Russian elites at that time. And as we know, Britain has succeeded in demolishing not only the German Empire or Austro-Hungarian Empire, but also the Russian Empire, right? 3 main competitors were demolished after the World War I by the British Empire. So after World War I, the British Empire became the supreme leader of the globe, pretty much, and the United States became the second most important power. Whereas after the World War II, they flipped, right? Now the US is the most powerful one, and the British Empire is the second one. And as I've reiterated previously, now actually the British Empire is being removed to the 3rd spot, whereas the second one is being held, or would be held soon, by the European Union, right? And that's the whole story behind the not carnivores situation, pandemic, and the war in Ukraine, and things like that, which is needed to create a European army, I mean, and push NATO out of Europe, thus reducing the American influence in Europe, by the way. But yeah, so yeah, we'll end up somewhere in Romania or Austria or like Germany or possibly France or maybe Italy in some cases, but it's gonna be this general area, right? So Germany, as we know, is the Schwarzwald, you know, it's the dark forest, black forest actually, literally, where all kinds of sinister stuff happens ever since it was colonized by civilized people, you know, when the Roman Empire actually moved to the north, right? Okay. Yeah, well, that's probably enough for this basic description of the myth, and a bunch of, as usual, side rants on top of it. So let's talk about the motivation and roots of this myth. So I'll just give you a few considerations with regards to, again, like, why is it so prominent and popular, and why is it not vanishing? Well, because it feeds into, like, basic human emotions and basic human perceptions, right? As with regards to society at the very least. So again, it's not going away anytime soon, all right? Regardless of whether it's true or not, right? It's a perception. It's not a true or false type of statement. It's a I see it this way type of statement, you know? An interpretation, if you wish, and it's shared pretty much by everyone. So again, yeah. So some of the roots of this, as I think, are, well, firstly, it's a fundamental misunderstanding, if you wish, of other people, well, an alienation, if you wish, like removal of one sort of people from the other, like segregation, maybe. By the way, watch my video, New Segregation. I think it's called New Segregation, but anyway, I'll link it in the description. So it's this inability, like, again, a very fundamental xenophobia, you might say, inability of people to understand other sort of people, right? Like, we actually needed many centuries of, like, liberal thinking to actually come to the realization, at least on a rational level, that, you know, being different is okay, all right? But again, it's only on the rational level, like emotionally, like subconsciously, I'm pretty damn sure most of the people, or even all of the people, are to some degree xenophobic, you know? And by xenophobic, I mean like racist, sexist, whatever, like any possible sort of, discrimination is present in everyone, to a large degree, I would say, at least in subconsciousness. In rational realm, of course, most, reasonable people actually are pretty fine with like dealing with others, other people, other sorts of, whatever. You get the idea. So it's this fundamental human xenophobia, not only human, I mean, like the more advanced animals also possess that. I mean, look at how cruel chimpanzees are to other chimpanzees, or something like that. Like they're just completely ferocious. Like they literally tear each other to pieces, right? One group of chimpanzees against the other, like one tribe, if you wish. So it's this feeling that they are different, and perhaps in a bad way, directed towards the elites, therefore demonizing them, therefore saying that they are vampires and stuff. They are cannibals, they are pedophiles. And somehow, like, I don't know, I think that it should be a triad, cannibalism, pedophilia, and incest. And somehow I haven't found anyone talking about incest in the elites, and I don't know why. So if you wish, I mean, it's not like I was looking for it, all right? But, like cannibalism, aka, adrenochrome, stem cell, vampirism, whatever, I see it every time in my Facebook feed. Pedophilia, I see it every time in my Facebook feed. Incest, not so much. Like, why? I mean, guys, come on. I mean, it's such an obvious idea. Like, why don't you pursue that, right? So in a way, I predict that soon somebody may come up with something like that. There would be like some horrific revelation of like incestual connections in the elites of the world, or something like that. Or maybe there is already. I'm just not following the news. I don't know. So yeah, with regards to this perception of the other people, there is also, you can mention gypsies, in the novel itself, in Dracula by Bram Stoker. So obviously gypsies help Dracula. Well, firstly, it's kind of the area where gypsies mostly live, right? Romania. But secondly, gypsies were always perceived as like different. Well, firstly, they're like quite literally different in the way that their way of life is very different. They're nomadic peoples, right? Thus, they were always connected to the occult stuff. It's like, even in Russian, when people say like gypsy woman, it's like one word in Russian, tsiganka, but it means like I went to the gypsy woman. It means like, for example, I went to a fortune teller or something like that. So all of these, like fortune telling practices with like tarot cards or crystal balls or stuff like that were always, even in Russia, connected to gypsies, right? And I think in most other places in Europe, it's something like that as well. So again, like deliberately we're introducing like these gypsies into this Dracula novel to like reinforce this differentness, of the elites in this case, right? That they also use the occult practices. That's one thing, like misunderstanding. The second thing is like dehumanization in general. Like when you perceive your enemy, you're like, in order for you to cope, I guess would be the word, with like you hating them or him or she or Z, whatever, you need to dehumanize them, right? You need to not perceive them as fellow humans, but rather as something different again. And so these 2 points are actually kind of mutually reinforcing. So yeah, any sort of dehumanization is good. And again, vampire is probably not human, therefore dehumanization, right? So there are all these stereotypes, about different peoples. Again, I've already mentioned gypsies, but There are many more, obviously. Pretty much every country has some sort of stereotype about itself, and every other country has stereotypes about other countries, right? Well, in this case, it's stereotypes about classes, right? Which again makes it that much more easier for any sort of, leftist, Marxist sort of interpretation of this whole shebang, of the Dracula myth, if you wish, of the elites using the occult practices and the elixir of youth. Basically, what Marxists would say is that Dracula is a metaphor for the ruling class, like the capitalists, sucking the living blood out of the proletariat, right? It's quite a straightforward, actually, interpretation, right? And thus, Dracula should be an aristocrat, but I mean, obviously, in Marxist view, he would be like a capitalist, right? As an owner of factory or of some sort. So, okay, that's two, like misunderstanding and dehumanization. The third would be root of this myth would be fear, obviously, because, well, again, it's something different and it's something powerful, therefore we should be afraid of it, right? And therefore, like, I didn't look it up, but I mean the analog, but in Russian there is a proverb saying that the fear has big eyes, meaning that, when you're afraid, you start inventing stuff, basically, right? Like adding more dangers, whereas there are none, right? So fear has this avalanche sort of effect, right? Self-reinforcing. Maybe there is an analog in English, but I haven't looked it up. So again, we are afraid of the elites because they are powerful. Therefore, we add all these additional, characteristics to them. Again, like this triad I've already mentioned, like some sort of demonic practices, perhaps both as a reason, like it could be the explanation in some weird interpretation, like explanations of the elites being powerful, right? Okay, this guy uses some occult practices to like hypnotize people or whatever, and therefore that's how he became so rich, right? So he's basically a mage of some sort, a wizard, or as a consequence of them being powerful. So this guy is rich and powerful, therefore he has access to all these occult practices, possibly forbidden and illegal practices, against most of which I've already mentioned, and therefore he practices them, right? Something like that. So it's actually works both ways in this sense. Again, in my video, Cult of Einstein and Hawking, I'm going to link it in the description. I've already talked about how this perception of both Einstein and Hawking as weirdos, not entirely normal people, actually helped to propagate their cult in the culture. And to a degree, it's also a vehicle that this myth that we're talking about uses to self-propagate in the culture, like the perception of the elites being weirdos, right? Something like that, where we are afraid of them and therefore we ascribe to them all these additional qualities that they not necessarily possess, I should say, pretty mildly, to put it, how do you say it, softly, I don't know, whatever. And the last important ingredient that I would mention, I'm not saying it's the exhaustive list, but I'm only gonna stop on this one, is the envy, or jealousy, or whatever you call it properly. I think envy is a more proper expression. So we demonize the elites, right? The enemy, if you wish, the class enemy, because it has, or they have, something that we don't have, right? The elites are powerful, they have a lot of money, a lot of possibilities, they can do whatever they want, and we can't. We don't have all of that. Therefore, we envy them, and we, again, sort of ascribe to them all this stuff that we don't have. It's sort of like a different, second whatever, other side of the medal of fear, right? We are afraid, but at the same time we wish to be like them, right? So in case of fear, we demonize them much more than they deserve, and in the case of envy, we actually paint their lives to ourselves as much more happy and like full of achievement and meaning than they are actually, right? So again, a good example actually connected to the occult would be witch hunts in like 17th century, for example, and 18th century potentially. I actually haven't studied the subject that well, but I mean, even the basic erudition is enough to understand what I'm talking about. Is like when basically, in a lot of cases, who were these witches, women specifically, these were women, like beautiful women that other beautiful women were envious of or jealous of, and they basically, you know, what's the word? Well, improperly accused them, you know, swatted them basically, right? They said, aha, she's a witch. Look at me, I'm a normal woman, I'm kind of a little bit ugly or maybe average at best. She's super beautiful, she's probably a witch, right? And it's such an easy exit, right, for any women. Just like today, and again, so like it's the same envy, like ascribing something bad to someone that you envy. You know, that's the basic pattern. Even today, like you know, like some, I'm not saying all, like beautiful women have. I mean, not necessarily like celebrities, but in, you know, sort of a lower level of fame, you know, in some not narrower circles, like people might spread rumors about certain woman that she, like very attractive woman, that she is, you know, easy, if you know what I mean. And these rumors are spread by whom? By other women who are envious of her, right? Jealous of her, because they are trying to lower her competitive status, right, in the mating sort of market, right? Because if men know that a woman is easy, they don't perceive her seriously as a prospect for future marriage, right? And it's basic biology, obviously. It's like men need a guarantee of paternal assurance, right? I need to know that this child is mine, and if my wife is easy, I cannot be sure, right? So it's other women utilizing this basic biological vehicle for their own ends, right? And it's kind of the same with this myth we're talking about. All right. And by the way, Dracula's brides were very beautiful, right, in the novel. So there's that. And the other novel from 1872, Carmilla, I think it's called, the French novel, where we've had this beautiful woman as a vampire in the first place, actually, right? Anyway, yeah, so that's probably enough, actually. Like, I've already ranted for more than half an hour at this point. So, yeah. Let's probably conclude. So, it is interesting to observe how these old mythical archetypes manifest themselves in such an open form in modern times. You know, the elites of, the archetype of the elites being cannibals and pedophiles and interesting people in general, right? So reading conspiracy people right now is almost like reading fairy tales of 500 years ago, right? With regards to the elites, at the very least. Okay, let me finish with another interesting thing regarding the elixir of youth and various funny practices people come up with. So, I think I've talked about this in one of the previous videos, but I can't for the life of me remember which one, so I'm just gonna repeat this, alright? So, it's the actual case of Walt Disney being interested in cryogenics, right? So what is the idea? Well, it's when you die, you like freeze your body for an indefinite amount of time, hoping that like 100 years later, people would find a way to actually revive you, right? And potentially make you younger than you were when you died. If you died of old age, for example. So there have been, and Walt Disney, the exact Walt Disney you think about, was very much into this thing. He was one of the enthusiasts of this cryogenic research. And there were rumors, because of that, that when he died, he was also frozen. I actually think it's completely reasonable, given how much he was into this stuff, even though his family is saying, no, this is not the case. He was cremated. Think about it, whatever you wish. But the conspiracy theory regarding that, which I think is true, but I've never heard anyone else talking about, but I think it fits perfectly if that is the case, is that the Disney company is so mad, like, if you know, maybe you don't, I don't know, it's one of the main lobbyists of copyright laws, right? Of copyright laws in particular being prolonged for more and more time into the future, right? So it would make sense, by the way, watch my video, Copyright and Intellectual Property, where I talk about that copyright is actually not a right, it's a monopolistic privilege. But anyway, an intellectual property is garbage, it shouldn't exist. So it would make sense if Disney company would do this, prolong the copyright thing for as much as they can, in order for, you know, Mr. Disney to revive sometime in the future and still benefit from all of this copyrighted stuff, right? It would make complete sense. So they're sort of preparing for his return, so to speak. And with regards to that, I would also like to recommend you a brilliant novel of Clifford Simak, the American sci-fi writer, called Why Call Them Back from Heaven, where this topic of cryogenics is explored to some detail with a pretty interesting twist. It's a novel from 1967, and I think it's pretty good. All right, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.